It was just another ordinary afternoon for Daniel. He had spent the morning running errands, stopping by the grocery store, and grabbing a quick coffee before heading home. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting warm golden rays over the quiet streets. The air smelled of fresh pavement after a light drizzle, and everything felt peaceful until something unexpected happened. As Daniel unlocked his car and slid into the driver's seat, he heard a soft, rustling noise behind him. At first, he thought it was just the wind. But then, before he could even process what was happening, a small, furry blur leaped into his car through the open passenger side window. His heart nearly jumped out of his chest. He turned sharply, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. And there it was, a cat. Not just any cat. This one had sleek black fur, bright green eyes that shimmered like emeralds, and an expression that somehow felt determined. It wasn't scared or frantic like a stray usually would be. Instead, it sat calmly on the passenger's seat, staring right at him, as if it had made a deliberate choice to be there. Daniel blinked, half expecting the cat to panic and claw its way out, but it just tilted its head slightly, as if waiting for him to say something. "What the? Where did you come from?" Daniel muttered, still in shock. He glanced around the empty parking lot, expecting to see someone running toward him, maybe an owner calling for their lost pet. But there was no one, just the quiet hum of the city in the distance, the occasional honk from a passing car, and this strange little feline sitting in his vehicle as if it had always belonged there. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't much of a cat person. He had nothing against them, but he had never owned a pet, never really thought about it. He was a man of routine. Work, gym, home, repeat. His life was predictable, structured. The last thing he needed was an unexpected passenger. "All right, buddy, time to go," he said, reaching over to gently nudge the cat toward the door. But to his surprise, the cat didn't move. Instead, it let out a soft, almost pleading meow, a sound so small yet strangely powerful, like it carried meaning beyond just a simple cry. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "This isn't happening," he muttered. He reached for his phone, ready to look up the nearest animal shelter, but just as he did, the cat stretched out a paw and placed it gently on his arm. It was such a small action, just a paw, resting lightly against his skin. But something about it made Daniel pause. He looked into the cat's eyes again, and for the first time, he felt something shift inside him, like a door he never knew existed had suddenly cracked open. Who did this cat belong to? Why had it jumped into his car? And why did it feel like this moment wasn't just random, but something bigger, something meant to happen? Daniel had no idea that the answer to those questions would change everything. Daniel sat there, staring at the cat, trying to decide what to do. He had never been in a situation like this before. It wasn't every day that an animal jumped into a stranger's car and acted like it belonged there. He glanced around the parking lot once more, hoping to see someone looking for a lost pet. But the street was quiet. A few cars passed in the distance, but no one seemed to be searching. "All right, I can't just sit here all day," he muttered. He reached for the door handle, planning to step out and check if the cat would follow. But the moment he shifted, the cat moved too. It jumped on his lap, curled up, and let out a deep purr. Daniel froze. He wasn't expecting that. The warmth of the small creature pressed against him felt oddly comforting, even though he barely knew what to do with it. He hesitated, then gently lifted the cat, placing it back on the passenger's seat. "Look, buddy, I don't know who you belong to, but you can't stay here," he said firmly. The cat, however, had other plans. It didn't look scared, lost, or even concerned. If anything, it looked like it had made up its mind. Its green eyes stayed locked onto Daniel, as if it was studying him, figuring him out. Then, slowly, it stretched out again and tapped his arm with its paw, just like before. Something about that tiny gesture unsettled Daniel. It wasn't normal cat behavior, was it? He had seen cats before, aloof, independent, always cautious. But this one was different. It acted like it knew him, like it had been waiting for him. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, but only until I figure out what to do with you." With that, he started the engine. The cat didn't flinch, didn't panic. It simply curled up on the seat as if it had been riding in cars its whole life. Daniel couldn't help but glance at it, every few moments as he drove. Who did this cat belong to? Why had it jumped into his car, of all people? As he pulled on a main road, he realized he had two choices. He could drive straight to an animal shelter and drop it off, or he could take it home, at least for the night, and see if anyone was missing it. He reached for his phone at a red light and typed "lost cat near me" into the search bar. Nothing came up. No recent posts, no missing pet flyers. He exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Maybe someone would start looking soon. Maybe he just needed to wait. In the meantime, he figured taking the cat home was the best option. The drive was quiet. The cat didn't move much, just watched him with those piercing green eyes. Every so often, Daniel felt like it was reading him, as strange as that sounded. When he finally pulled up to his apartment building, he hesitated for a second before grabbing his bag and opening the door. "All right, let's go," he said, expecting the cat to need some encouragement. But again, it surprised him. It leaped gracefully out of the car and followed him like a well-trained pet. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Daniel shook his head in disbelief as he led it up the stairs to his place. Inside, he set his things down and looked at the cat. "Okay, first things first, you need food. And I don't exactly have a stash of cat food lying around." He opened the fridge, scanning its contents. Leftover pizza, eggs, half a carton of milk. None of that seemed ideal. He pulled out a small plate and poured a little bit of milk onto it. "I think this is okay, right?" he muttered, placing it on the floor. The cat sniffed it, but didn't drink. Instead, it just looked up at him, tail flicking. "You're picky too, huh?" Daniel sighed, standing up. "All right, I guess I'm making a quick trip to the store." He grabbed his keys, but when he turned back, the cat was already sitting by the door, waiting, like it knew where he was going. The whole thing was getting weirder by the second. At the store, Daniel walked down the pet aisle, feeling completely out of his depth. He had never shopped for a cat before. Wet food, dry food, treats. He grabbed a couple of cans and a small bag of kibble, figuring he'd sort out the details later. As he paid, he found himself glancing at the community board near the exit. Lost dog, free puppies, yard sale, but no missing black cat. Back home, the cat finally ate. It still watched Daniel closely, though, as if waiting for something. He sat down on the couch, scrolling through his phone for any updates. Still nothing. "Guess you're stuck with me for now," he muttered. That night, something strange happened. Daniel had always been a light sleeper, but he woke up to an odd feeling, like someone was watching him. As he blinked in the dim light, he saw the cat sitting at the edge of his bed, perfectly still. Its green eyes glowed faintly in the dark. A shiver ran down his spine. "You're really something else, aren't you?" he whispered. The cat didn't move, didn't blink. Daniel lay back down, closing his eyes, but the unease stayed with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a lost pet. There was something more to it. He just didn't know what yet. The next morning, Daniel woke up to an unusual silence. Normally, he would hear the distant hum of traffic, the occasional siren, or the muffled chatter of his neighbors through the thin apartment walls. But today, everything felt still. Too still. His eyes flickered open, and for a moment, he wasn't sure what had startled him. Then he remembered the cat. He sat up quickly and scanned the room. The cat was nowhere to be seen. His heart skipped a beat. Had found a way out? He wasn't exactly used to having a pet, and he hadn't thought to check if the windows were open. He threw the blankets off and hurried to the living room. And there it was, sitting on the windowsill, completely still, staring outside. Daniel let out a breath of relief. "You scared me," he muttered. He walked over, expecting the cat to look at him, maybe even acknowledge his presence. But it didn't. Its green eyes were locked on something outside, something in the street below. Daniel followed its gaze. The street looked normal. A few cars parked along the curb, a man walking his dog, an old woman watering her plants on a balcony. Nothing strange, nothing worth that level of attention. But the cat didn't move. "All right, what are you looking at?" he asked, crouching beside it. He squinted, trying to see what had caught its focus. And then he noticed something. A man. At first, Daniel thought he was just another pedestrian, maybe waiting for a bus. But the longer he watched, the more something felt off. The man wasn't doing anything. He just stood there on the sidewalk across the street, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his head tilted slightly upward, looking, not at the building, not at the street, at him. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. The moment he realized it, the man moved. He turned sharply and disappeared around the corner as if he had been caught. Daniel stood up, his pulse quickening. "That's weird," he muttered. He glanced at the cat. It was still staring at the spot where the man had been, as if it had expected him to be there, as if it knew him. Daniel shook his head, pushing away the unease creeping into his chest. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe the guy had just been lost, looking around. Still, something about it didn't sit right. He tried to go about his day, as usual. Made coffee, answered a few work emails. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the cat's arrival and the man outside were somehow connected. As the hours passed, he found himself checking the window more than he wanted to admit. The man didn't come back, but the unease remained. By late afternoon, Daniel decided he needed answers. He grabbed his phone and took a picture of the cat. Then he uploaded it to a few local lost pet groups, hoping someone might recognize it. He added a simple message. "Found this cat near downtown. Jumped into my car. Anyone missing it?" He waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. A few likes, a couple of comments saying the cat was beautiful, but nothing useful. Then, finally, a message popped up. It was short, just one sentence, but made Daniel's stomach tighten. "Where did you find that cat?" Something about the wording sent a strange feeling through him. Not, "That's my cat," or "I know the owner." Just, "Where did you find it?" Daniel hesitated, then typed back. "Near 5th and Main. Do you know whose it is?" The person started typing. Then they stopped. The little bubbles flickered on and off. Then the message came through. "Don't keep it. You need to get rid of it." Daniel's breath caught. What kind of response was that? His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He was about to ask what they meant when another message appeared. "If it found you, it's already too late." A sharp knock at his door made him jump. His heart pounded as he turned toward it. He hadn't been expecting anyone. He slowly walked toward the door, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He hesitated before peeking through the peephole. No one was there. A rush of cold air ran through him. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. The hallway outside was empty. His phone buzzed again. Another message. "Don't let it stay." Daniel swallowed hard. He turned back toward the living room. The cat was still there, sitting on the windowsill, watching, waiting. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones. But he wasn't sure if he wanted to know the truth. Not yet. Daniel's hands felt cold as he stared at his phone screen. His mind raced through the messages, trying to make sense of them. "If it found you, it's already too late." The words looped in his head like an echo he couldn't shake. He turned slowly toward the cat. It was still on the windowsill, its tail curled neatly around its paws, eyes locked on him. The air in the apartment felt heavier, like the walls were pressing in. His instincts screamed at him to do something, to act. But act how? What did these messages even mean? A sharp noise made him jump. A rustling sound, low, deliberate, coming from his front door. His breath hitched. Someone was out there. Daniel moved cautiously, his footsteps nearly silent against the floor. He pressed his ear to the door, listening. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the hallway lights. Then another sound. A slow, dragging noise like something being pulled along the floor just outside his door. His fingers tightened around his phone. He checked the peephole again. Still no one. But then, there it was. A shadow, just on the edge of his vision. Low to the ground. Moving. Daniel's pulse hammered at his chest. He unlocked his phone with shaky hands and pulled up the messages. He typed quickly. "Who are you? What does this mean?" No response. A thud against the door. Soft. Subtle. But enough to send a jolt through him. He took a step back. His brain raced through his options. Call someone? Open the door? Ignore it? The cat let out a low, deep purr. Not a friendly one. A sound that felt almost knowing. Daniel looked at it, a strange fear settling into his bones. "What are you?" he whispered, barely realizing he had said it out loud. The cat didn't move, just watched him. Then his phone buzzed. A new message. "It's not what you think." Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to throw the phone across the room. He wanted to pretend none of this was happening. But he couldn't. His hand was shaking now. The messages, the man outside, the thing at his door, it was all too much. He needed to end this. He needed answers. Summoning every ounce of courage, he reached for the door handle. He hesitated for only a second, then turned it, yanking the door open. The hallway was empty, but something had been there. He could feel it. The air was thick with it. A presence. A weight. Then he noticed something on the floor just outside his apartment. A small, folded piece of paper. Daniel hesitated before bending down to pick it up. The paper was rough, like it had been torn from a notebook. The handwriting inside was uneven, hurried. You need to leave. Now. Daniel's stomach twisted. He looked up and down the hallway. No one. Just the flickering light at the far end. He stepped back inside and shut the door quickly, locking it. His breath came in short, uneven bursts. The cat had moved. It was no longer on the windowsill. Daniel turned, searching the room. His heart pounded against his ribs. Where was it? Then he saw it, sitting in the middle of the room, staring. The silence stretched between them. The tension so thick it felt like the air itself might snap. And then, without breaking eye contact, the cat slowly, deliberately smiled. Daniel's blood turned to ice. His breath caught in his throat. That wasn't possible. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls seemed closer. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then, the lights flickered, and everything went dark. Daniel stood frozen in the dark. His breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as the silence stretched around him. He wanted to move, to reach for his phone, to do something, but his body refused to cooperate. The room had changed. It wasn't just the lack of light. Something felt different, like the space itself had shifted. A sound broke through the silence. Soft, almost imperceptible. The faint padding of paws against the floor. Daniel's fingers twitched. He forced himself to move, reaching into his pocket and fumbling for his phone. The screen lit up, casting a dim glow, and he turned it toward the room. His eyes darted around, searching. The cat was gone. His pulse pounded in his ears. He swept the light around frantically, checking every corner. Then, movement. Just beyond the glow, a shadow shifting. His hands trembled. "Where are you?" he whispered. His voice felt too loud in the suffocating silence. A flicker of movement near the couch. He turned the light toward it, and for a fraction of a second, he saw them. Two glowing green eyes staring at him from the darkness. Then a whisper, not a sound a cat should make. Daniel stumbled backward, his heart slamming against his ribs. His mind screamed at him to get out, to run, to leave this thing behind. His phone buzzed in his hand, making him jump. He looked down. Another message. "It's still with you." His breath hitched. He whipped his head back toward the corner, but the eyes were gone. The room was silent again. Daniel clenched his jaw. No, he couldn't keep spiraling like this. He needed to end it. Now. He grabbed his jacket and keys and stormed toward the door. He didn't care if it was late. He was taking the cat to a shelter. Or anywhere. It didn't matter as long as it was gone. But when he opened the door, the hallway was no longer empty. A man stood there. The same man he had seen outside. The one watching him. Daniel's stomach dropped. The man's eyes flicked past him into the apartment, then back to Daniel. His expression was serious, unreadable. "It chose you," he said, his voice low. Daniel's fingers tightened around his keys. "What are you talking about?" His voice came out hoarse, strained. The man exhaled, as if weighing his words. "You shouldn't have let it in." Daniel felt the weight of the night crashing down on him all at once. "Then help me. Take it back. Do something." The man shook his head. "It doesn't work like that." His gaze shifted past Daniel again. "Once it's in, it stays." A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. He turned slightly, as if expecting to see something standing behind him. But the room was empty. Or at least, it looked empty. Daniel swallowed hard. "So what do I do?" The man hesitated. Then, for the first time, his expression softened. "You have to let it leave. On its own." Daniel's mind raced. Let it leave? What did that even mean? And if it doesn't? The man didn't answer. He just gave him a long, knowing look, then turned and walked away, disappearing down the stairwell. Daniel stood there, feeling more lost than ever. He slowly shut the door, his body heavy with exhaustion. His apartment felt quieter than before, almost hollow. He turned, scanning the room. "Is this what you want?" he murmured. "For me to be afraid of you?" Silence. He took a slow breath. "I don't know what you are," he admitted, his voice steady, "but I don't think you want to hurt me." Something shifted in the air. A presence, subtle but undeniable. Daniel sat down on the couch, rubbing a hand over his face. "If you want to stay, I can't stop you. But if you're supposed to leave, then go." For a long time, nothing happened. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. The cat, sitting by the door. Its tail flicked once. Daniel's heart pounded as he watched. Slowly, the cat turned. It walked toward the door, paused, then looked back at him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them. A silent understanding. And then, just like that, the cat slipped through the door. Daniel didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, staring at the empty space where it had been. When he finally stood up and opened the door, the hallway was empty. No cat, no strange man, just silence. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself expecting to see it again, to hear the soft sound of paws against the floor, to feel that quiet presence lingering. But it never returned. Whatever it was, it had moved on, and somehow, Daniel knew he would never see it again. But he also knew that he would never forget.